I wanted to leave most of the time tonight to a dialogue among us. I'll say a few things in introduction, but very few. Just give you some idea of the anthology and what we hoped to achieve from it. I want to say, first of all, that, you know, your name goes on a book, but that is no real proof that you wrote it. In the sense that, you know, I did an article that appeared, or an article was done that appeared in Comment is Free. I wrote it this morning, but Nina was there giving me ideas and feeding me facts and all the rest, and my name went on it, and that often is the case because we do work collectively, that it's the work of many people, and even if they didn't contribute to any particular piece, the very fact that there's an anthology is evidence that there was a movement and that there was an organization, and that organization was collectively working to do a few things. And that's what the anthology is. Now I'm going to mention the few things that it was trying to do. First of all, it wanted to be anti-capitalist from women's point of view, because we knew if it was from women's point of view, it would also be from men's point of view, but the opposite was not true. Because women are unwaged workers, most of us, in varying degrees, and we take care of everyone, and we work for the survival of everyone, and we care, we do a lot of justice work, in particular for men, but also for children, so that we are more fundamental. The work that we do and the lives that we lead are more fundamental in some respects, and more, I shouldn't say fundamental, more comprehensive, perhaps, than men. And I know from experience, because I come from a working class family which was up to its eyes and trying to build trade unions and various other things, that there would be no struggle of men, except that the women were backing them, that the women were keeping things together, and that often, even as in the great movement for the CIO in the United States, that women lined up between the police and the men and said, shoot us first, and it was that crucial moment that ensured that General Motors was unionized. So that's the first thing we've been trying to do, is to see the anti-capitalist working class struggle from the point of view of unwaged women in particular, but women in general. We were trying to do that, and we were trying to say that when we were unwaged, as I have been as a full-time housewife, that we're not even considered part of the working class, and that extended to the most of the third world, which is also unwaged. So that the conception that we met on the left was a very small portion of who the working class, who the subverters of capitalism are. We enlarged that to include all the unwaged workers, not only by gender, but in the world. So we were trying to make that clear too. The third thing we were trying to do, you know, I'm trying to figure the things we were trying to do. If you have 41 years, it'll be 41 years next month, what we were trying to accomplish. The third thing I think that we were trying to accomplish, you know, was to show that the divisions among us were really the way capitalism organizes. That it wasn't an accident, racism, that gender discrimination and that sexism weren't an accident. They were the way that capitalism organizes us to keep us divided so that they can, you know, take off the billions. And we didn't think that those divisions We thought those divisions should be undermined, but not by hiding them. You don't undermine divisions by hiding them. You undermine divisions by making them loud and clear and specific, and then use them for target practice. You know, that I mean in an organizational sense. So that's one of the other things we tried to do. And we tried to show always not only how much we are divided, but that what we had in common had to be the basis of the struggle to organize against capitalism. That we've been trying to do that stuff, and with varying degrees of success. I can't say we won. We're living in capitalism, so we haven't. But we've won a few things, and each of the struggles that we've been involved in, we always won something, or almost always won something, which strengthened us. We never felt that if we were defeated, that's the way to win. We don't believe in that theory, you know, that it's, what is it? It's revolutionary, that it's reformist to win. We think winning is good. And we think that when you win, you are stronger for the next struggle. And so we've tried very hard always to win something. And we've always tried that if any sector wins, how can other sectors use it to win something for themselves? So that was an important part of what we tried to do. Now, having begun with unwaged women, and having encompassed, I think, the world and trying to build an international network, which is the only way to be anti-racist. You can't be anti-racist and you're nationalist. You have to be anti-racist by showing all the divisions among us on an international level. Having done that, having addressed that with varying degrees of success, we realized that what we were doing, or at least we understood in a more precise way that what we were doing was saying, among other things, that women are responsible for the reproduction of the human race, and we began to notice, and increasingly, that most left organizations did not even discuss that. Now, I think the reproduction of the human race is rather important. It's all of us. It's our survival. It's our struggle ecologically. It's our struggle for wealth. It's our struggle for our children. That's a tremendously important question. You know, children are often neglected as the subject and the object of struggle. And it's our struggle for survival in every sense of the word. And we always ultimately have to say, well, we are struggling for the reproduction of the human race, which means we must be against the market, because it's the market which absolutely refuses to admit, or certainly not agree to, that the human race is central. The market for the coalition of the three parties that we know about, I include Labour in that, they're for the austerity, they can't seem to attack it, pardon me, that all the three parties support the market and therefore do not support as crucial the prioritizing of the reproduction of the human race. So the anthology traces over about 60 years, because I'm 82, and it's not unreasonable to begin in your 20s to write little things down. All the aspects, all the things, or many of the things that we fought for and sometimes describing how we fought for them. And this is the last point I'll make. I had a 5-week tour of the US a couple of months ago, and I understood before too long that what people really wanted to know was really two things: whether we could win, and if so, how. They didn't want to know why. They knew capitalism. They saw Obama, whom they had had some confidence in, and saw what a disaster he was and how the military really was in charge of him. You know, they had been through all kinds of struggles. They had seen the defeat of the movements of the 60s. They had seen organizations which the movement struggled to form become NGOs or non-profits, which made the priority themselves and their grant applications. Everybody had seen it. They knew about it. You didn't have to say capitalism is bad. That would have been boring. What they wanted to know is, could we beat the hell out of them? And if you think we could, how? How should we organize? How should we prevent the organizations which we form turning against us? How could we keep track and keep control of those we appoint as our leaders? You know, how? And so the anthology, I hope, begins to reflect that struggle and that attempt to find out how. And I hope it will be useful to you if you choose to read it. Okay?
Comments, anything. It's very quiet.
And of course we'll hear you.
I was just interested in your comments about Obama, because I don't think he's a disaster, but I think that he had in his first term to try very hard to be acceptable for a second term. So he's succeeded in that, and now he's really going for it, as he should have been. But, you know, I think these things take time and they have to be done gradually, because, as you said, the military are on his tail all the time. So what do you think he should have done better?
One thing. There's only one thing that he should have done better. He came in the first term because there was a movement. Now, some of my friends say, no, there wasn't a movement, but I say there was. There were millions of people who not only voted for Obama, you know, racists voted for Obama. You know, that's a big moment in the United States when racists will vote for a black man. And when the head of the unions in the United States made a speech and said to his membership, there is no reason, why working people should not vote for Obama. That was a big statement. It meant his color is not our business here. Our business is to elect him. And you know what that son of a gun Obama did? Once he got elected, he took the whole organization, the whole network of millions of people who had been active and who were thrilled, and he handed it over to the Democratic Party. That meant the end of his calling on us, you and me, out there in the US anyway, to back him in what he wanted done. The military is in control because we were not allowed by him, or we were prevented by him, better still, let's be more precise, we were discouraged by him to stand against the military and with him. Dig that. Very important. We were discouraged from supporting health care that mattered, the end of Guantanamo. We were raring for that. People in the United States would have died to close Guantanamo, but he handed them to the Democratic Party. And there, I happened to have been there after the election, and someone who had been organizing for Obama came to the home where I was staying with a woman who had been organizing for Obama. And so I heard the discussion between them, and she said, look, we have to keep fighting. One was black and one was white. This was not relevant to the discussion, but I report that. The woman for Obama said, look, we have to keep backing him. And she said, I will not support the Democratic National Committee. You can't ask me to do that. And she said, yes, but we don't have any choice. So she said, well, there's the movement outside, and I'm going to stick with that. But that's what happened with Obama. Now, many other things happened too, I'm sure, and there are so many things that happened that I know nothing about. But I know about this crucial thing, which was a mobilization that mattered, then turned over to the Democratic National Committee to be in charge of. And that is a crime that that he stands guilty of, because he prevented us from backing serious proposals which I happen to have voted, because I'm American, I happen to have voted for him, we the voters had put in our ballot for him to do. I only mentioned a couple, but that's what it was. He may be able to do a bit more now, but he's really tainted. And a lot of white people, white racists, some of them, and some of them not, a lot of white people this time said, no, they're not going to do that twice. They're not going to risk everything and put their money on a black horse, so to speak, and then the horse goes the opposite direction and doesn't go for the finish line. They're not going to say, oh, well, I'll put my money on that horse again. That's fundamental, but it's an experience we've made. And people now know that many of us voted for Obama this second time, but not because they thought he was going to do great things. We voted for him because we hadn't voted for that black man, that white lunatic would have set his dogs, on black people in particular. And we couldn't have that happen. We had to have Obama once again, but not with any illusions, not at all.
Can I ask you a question? Do people mind if we film the audience when you ask questions? Does anyone mind? Okay. Yes, the lady at the front. Do you want to get up and...
Okay. Yeah.
Yes.
I don't know if it's a question really, more a point for discussion, but I feel like feminism has been quite a lot in the media in the UK at the moment with things like Caitlin Moran and the Agenda magazine online and Girls, the TV programme, but it's kind of feminism light. It's kind of a feminism that's like, if I look out for other women, that's enough. And I was just wondering people's views on, you were talking about feminism as anti-capitalism, and I think the two are intertwined. I think patriarchy supports capitalism. I basically don't think you can have a form of feminism that isn't radical and it works. I was just wondering what your views are on an accessible movement, an inclusive movement, whether that waters it down and whether that makes it less effective, basically.
Well, I'm afraid that feminism cracks on class lines. Feminism, many feminists in the United States think Hillary Clinton is a feminist. Nicholas Walter, not Nicholas Walter, what's her name? Natasha Walter thinks that that was a feminist. Oh yes. And feminism has become, unfortunately, sadly, tragically, has become identified with breaking the glass ceiling. A lot of us are right down in the basement, and feminism has not been interested. Now, I don't want to read anything, but I have to tell you, it's such a good opportunity to tell you about Eleanor Roosevelt. Is anybody here knows her? Yeah, yes, our people from the Women's Center, they know her.
A man at the end. There's a man at the
There's
end.
a man at the end. Is he over 60?
Yeah.
I don't know if
Yes.
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 Yeah, because Eleanor Roosevelt, this is about feminism. This is about real feminism. Eleanor Roosevelt was a great feminist, and she was also, in the 1940s, the most famous woman in Britain. And what Eleanor did, Eleanor came from Liverpool. There used to be two MPs that were not political parties, but that were independent university representatives, and she was an MP, an independent MP. And she came from a family of ship owners who refused to carry slaves. Now that's a very good balance out of the suffrage, and that their poverty and dependence would be ended by women having the vote. But when women got the vote, most women went for careers, and only she and some others, including Virginia Woolf, who was a real feminist, you know, she stood with women every time, including in her fiction, I might add, and some of them, you know, fought. She led the campaign for family allowance. She convinced, what's his name? I never forget it, never remember. She convinced Beveridge to include it in his report. She personally convinced him. And in 1948, the first family allowance was paid. Now, when they decided, first of all, when they agreed the Beveridge report, you know, Churchill in his brilliance thought he would give the family allowance to men. And she told him, don't. And she said it in such a threatening way, it seems, that he said, I'll never do that, I won't, no. And he backed away, and it was paid to women. And she was deeply disappointed by the amount, because she thought it would be a wage for the working class housewife, the woman who was at the bottom of the pile, the woman who was disinherited in the family, who got nothing for herself. She was a woman who fought for the Jews to be let in to Britain from Hitler's Germany. She was a woman who fought for Indian independence and confronted Nehru about the treatment of Indian women. She was a feminist, and she wanted to change the world, and she wanted to change the balance of power within the working class. And she has been written out of history by feminists. Yes. We published this book in 80-something. There are a lot of copies because people haven't bought them, but I hope that will change. And so that we can begin to see that feminism split when the suffrage was won, not only in this country but in other places for various reasons. First of all, it split on the war, because Sylvia Pankhurst was not going to fight for any imperialist war. She was anti-war, while her family were reactionary and disgusting. And it split also on whether the promise of change for women at the bottom was going to be fulfilled by feminism. So there is a tradition. When we built the women's liberation movement in the 70s, we were all for changing the world. At least I was not conscious of women who were not for changing the world, but they were soon for their careers. And, you know, so many things have happened that feminism has not fought for or against. And one of those was the end of income support for single mothers, when that was proposed by Tony Blair's reactionary government, which called working class women, or women who did unwaged work, workless. Workless. Imagine a woman with 4 or 5 children is workless. You know, you have to be really deeply reactionary to have that view. When we fought to defend single mothers' right to benefit, we got no takers among feminists. They didn't fight for us. They didn't fight for the single mother, in spite of the fact that the single mother had had so much to do with building the women's liberation movement. They put their kids on their back and they went to this service and built this other service and were there on some picket line and were there at the meeting and demanding creches for their children so they could fully participate. You know, that we lived through, some of us, a few of us, lived through that. And we learned that the movement splits. Now, I'm not saying that's only true of feminism. Every movement has split that way. What is the man who claims, who says that Sarah, who helped Ken, who was part of...
Lee Jasper.
Lee Jasper. Such a reactionary. And he comes from the black movement. He's no movement at all. He is the antithesis of movement. He's what capitalism needs desperately, a black man to stand against us, and black people haven't got anything from him at all. And so that's happened with the black movement. That's happened with the anti-immigration. It's happened with every movement that we have built, and we have learned from it, which is why I said when I began, you know, people want to work out how to organize so that the very movements you form don't stand, you know, against you. You wake up in the morning and they're on the other side. And it's a hard thing to acknowledge, you know, and it's bitter. But when you see how it actually works out, you can begin to organize autonomously of that reaction and find your way. My answers have to be shorter.
Sorry, let me try and move this thing. She has got feet that get in the way. It's very troublesome.
Well, it's an autonomous movement in itself. It's not feminism. It's not a movement. But
the thing that the Global Women's Strike has done, in which you'll see in the anthology, I don't know if you've had a chance to read it yet, but it actually picks up many, many specific things that people are fighting on. You know, prostitution, benefits, war, everything. And those are the things that makes it inclusive. Mm-hmm. It's not by being anodyne and not saying anything that will offend mm-hmm. the other side. Mm-hmm. You know, that's the way to be inclusive of the other side, but not inclusive of ourselves. I think the anthology is very concrete, and it does go into many specific examples that show that.
Thank you. I hadn't quite understood that you were saying that.
I don't know. That's fine.
Yeah.
I think you answered.
Any comments, questions? Yeah, go ahead. You nearly had your hand up. Go ahead.
I'm a little shy.
Listen loud.
I go to school in Florida. Obviously, I can't be American enough. But I'm here studying abroad, and I recently took a course taught by Patricia.
We can't really hear
You
you.
can't hear me? Okay. I recently took a class taught by Patricia Schroeder, and I'm really intrigued by her question because that's something that I guess argued a bit with her, which is unfortunate because she definitely believes in like I appreciate everything that she's done for women thus far, but I feel like a lot of liberal feminists do this watering down of what they might really believe in. And I would get into these arguments with her, and it was always just kind of difficult to express that being radical doesn't mean being like crazy, I guess, you know? It just means that, okay, like, thank you for everything that liberal feminists have done up until now, but we need to keep pushing forward. So, as a young person especially, I get this a lot from feminists who are older than me that are like, you're young, like, you will change when you realize how things really are. And I'm just kind of wondering, I'm writing a paper on this as well, I'm wondering how... If you can, I guess, just give me any feedback, like, how can we present an agenda that people can begin to digest, and without becoming just like watered down and mainstream and like.
There's no reason to water down. I mean,
Come here, closer to the mic.
part of
That's
the
it,
work
that's it.
that you do, if you want to change society, you have to take Marx's advice. His advice is always very good. And he says you have to be absolutely precise about what's wrong. Now, that's not easy. It isn't easy to be precise because we are trained to be imprecise, vague, this is an Orwell celebration, centenary of his birth, I think. And it's really a good occasion to be more precise about language and to be more aware of how language is being used against us. For example, the Labour Party often says that Tories have failed, but they've succeeded. They wanted us to be impoverished. They won on that. They wanted unemployment. Again, they won. They wanted the banks to be allowed to steal money. Absolutely. What is it they failed at? But they say they failed is to put in our minds that what has happened was not the intention of the Tories. Because, among other things, they share that intention. Labour does. I think it's definitely part of the coalition, but it's kind of left wing of the coalition. Who needs it? I think that spelling out how, there's a woman called Alison Wolfe who is an academic and has written a paper. And I think there's a book in the pipeline on the class divisions among women. And what she has said is, I have the paper with me if people are interested in seeing it later. What she has said is that feminism has caused a class line among women which is sharper than the one that preceded it. Because the women who have made it have an experience which is enormously different from the traditional experience of women. First of all, they have careers, not jobs. Most of us have jobs. We don't have any career, we have a job. That is, we do it because we need the money. We don't do it because we're going to be elevated and excited by and stimulate. Nonsense. We do it because at the end of the week or the month we get money. And that's a very big difference, and that's relatively new because most women did not rise through the glass ceiling. And as a result of this big difference between women rising and women who never left the ground, what has happened is that those women who have been incorporated into the elite, yes, the elite is diverse, but not what they say and not what they do, so that women in high places do not think like women anymore. They think like the market. And that is a very big difference. So, you know, the precision you have to describe, you have to see what the figures mean, you have to say exactly what you mean. And I have to say that what I mean by feminism, when it comes to Eleanor Rathbone and Virginia Woolf, and some others too, I'm not saying those are the only ones, Sylvia Pankhurst was great, and others, was that they always began with women. Now, that's not something that feminism does anymore. They begin with women rising as if the breaking of the glass ceiling was changing the world, whereas it doesn't. It just makes the elite more diverse, but women are not more represented if they have 100 women in parliament, because if you remember, when Tony Blair's government came in, Blair's babes and others were over 100 MPs female, and the first thing they did was to cut single parent benefit.
That's right.
With friends like that, with feminists like that, who needs male chauvinist pigs? You know, so the precision is what matters. If you want to be clear about what you should be doing, with whom and against whom. That's crucial.
Comment on how what's happening in India at the moment, following the rape and the death of that woman, and also the coverage of it here as well.
She said, would you like to comment on what's happening in India at the moment and coverage over here as well?
We knew what was happening about India more than most because our international network extends to India, and NCM and the Chhattisgarh Women's Organization is part of the Global Women's Striik, and Manju Gadia, who is the point of reference for the women in 400 villages in Chhattisgarh, works with Dalit and tribal women against the rape by landlords, police, and politicians, as well as individual men. And their movement has been tremendous. And we knew that this was, although this may be a uniquely good organization, it's not a unique organization. We knew that there was a grassroots anti-rape movement in India. So when this burst out, we were not prepared. You're never prepared for a movement. You can't prepare for a movement. It's like a thief in the night, as Marx says. But we were not surprised by it, and we knew how deep the roots were of this massive movement. Now, what was striking to me about its reporting here was, I want to give an example of Woman's Hour. Woman's Hour, I don't go out of my way to hear it, but I'm an inveterate listener to Radio 4, which aggravates me constantly. But I can't turn it off. And there is Woman's Hour interviewing a woman from India who is saying there are thousands on the street and we are going to attack, you know, we are the women on the rural women are the ones who have got the worst of it, not the ones in the city. She didn't say Dalit and tribal, but she said the workers on the land, the farm workers and that, and they have to deal with an alliance, she said. I heard this on Woman's Hour, the alliance of police, landowners, and the political class. And the woman from Woman's Hour said, oh dear, That's a very gloomy picture. She said, no. She said, there are thousands on the street. How can it be gloomy? And, you know, I think Woman's Hour got a shock. Because we are really, as an anti-rape movement here, and Women Against Rape and Black Women's Rape Action Project are both at our center, so I have daily reports. Many women's organizations that are anti-rape have, or say they're anti-rape, have police on their boards and do not attack what the police, the Crown Prosecution Service, the courts, all of them prevent from being attacked, being identified, being shown up, and that they have absolutely either to defend women or they have to resign or be kicked out, etc. You know, war can speak for itself. Is BRAP here? Maybe not, but war is definitely here, and they can defend themselves. The point is that the Indian movement has begun to encompass in one movement across the rural and urban divide, and I think finally across sectors, that is, means across caste and class, and that is tremendous, and it's very hard, I have to say, to get a picture of that movement here, although there shouldn't be any difficulty. You know, these women are ready to talk, and they have a lot to say, and they're full of ideas, and they're full of the movement, because, you know, when there's a movement in the street of thousands and thousands of people, your mind begins to work. It's just you are transformed by it, and by its power, and by its possibilities. But we are not getting the best of that. But we've done the best we could to advertise, and Manju wrote a statement for us, which we tried to incorporate into the demonstrations here without a lot of luck, because some people did not want to hear from women in India, and they were Indian women, but they were not too keen to be so against the Indian High Commission and, you know, the establishment. There's a lot of backing down in confronting the establishment within feminism. We're a bit different from that. So I think it's fantastic, and I think it's going to spread, and I'm hoping to hear the reports from China. That's my only wish. That the Chinese women will take it up and clean up the mess in a lot of ways, because you do not attack rape and the establishment that defends rape without really shaking the whole society. And there are a lot of things that are going to be shaken, and shaken a lot, I think.
Egypt, you say it's also Egypt.
Well, you know, in Egypt, the women had a day when, you know, when they, during the height of the revolution, although that revolution has not gone away, during the height of the revolution, the women organized to have their own demonstration, and the reactionary army and thugs, etc., you know, drove them away. But they came back later with the support of the movement, and they were guarded by the movement so they would not be attacked again. So there's a lot to say. There really is a lot to say. But one of the things we're going to have to, now we get into controversy, okay. One of the things we're going to have to be clear about is that if the establishment points a finger at somebody, the same establishment who is always defending rapists, all of a sudden they discover that this man is a rapist, that we have to be very careful before we agree with them. And that's what happened with Julian Assange. And there was a nice woman who interviewed me from the Statesman, and I pointed out to her that an article she'd done spoke in the same breath about Jimmy Savile, that friend of the establishment, and Julian Assange, that enemy of the biggest imperial power the world has ever known. And I pointed out that you cannot speak about these two in the same breath. And she said she'd have to think about it. And then I asked her, didn't your friends tell you that that was a great mistake? And she said, no, nobody. And we have to think about that. We have to think about how easy it has been for Julian Assange. I don't know if he's innocent or guilty, I'm not discussing that. How, it is unclear just, how vague it is, how imprecise it is that these two very different men with very different political perspectives, were equated. That's a very important part of getting the anti-rape movement in gear.
Okay, yes, you have, the sister over there, and then you have the brother on the right, okay?
I was just wondering how...
You have to speak up, otherwise we can't hear you.
Yeah.
Louder!
I just wanted to know how the Caribbean has influenced your views, the Caribbean, in regards to your feminism.
Well, that's the first time anybody has asked me that, and I'm thrilled. When I was in the Caribbean, I was mostly in Trinidad, and there was a great struggle for Caribbean independence and federation. And the Women's League of the leading nationalist party asked me to speak to their, I don't know what kind of a meeting it was. It wasn't a very big meeting, but it was a meeting that represented, many parts of the country. And I spoke about my ideas. Listen, this was a long time ago. It was 1959. I spoke about my life and how women in the United States, which is mainly what I knew by then, because I hadn't been in England very long, before I went there. And then I said, okay, now you have to tell me about you. And my mind was blown, because what they described was an independence and federation movement that I had never heard about, and my clever husband didn't know either. They talked about how they had organized to come into Port of Spain, which is where the meeting took place. How early in the morning they got up, how they cooked the lunch for the children and for the man, and how they organized. And then they told him when he said, you're going, and that, they say, I have to do it for the nation. And he couldn't say no. He had to let them go. And, this was a struggle that was entirely hidden, and I learned a great deal more. I learned about domestic workers and how they were trying to get it together. And I learned about the enormous gap between women at the bottom and women who were rising in the new nationalist hierarchy. And so I really learned a great deal, first of all about women, but through women, I learned about what it meant to be in the, and I'm using this word advisedly, the periphery. I knew how people felt when London was the capital of every West Indian island, and how it feels when you feel the real thing is happening elsewhere and you're just a poor copy or trying to, follow behind. I learned a great deal, and I learned about race in another way. It was an overwhelming black society. They didn't care two hoots about race. They were all black. So, this wasn't an issue. They knew about racism. They knew something about racism in other countries, and they knew about racism because white and light-skinned people had power that black people did not, but they felt they could manage all that. And I found out something about what every country knows if they look, every movement knows, that the West Indian people wanted to be together, but the politicians were so ambitious that they kept the people apart. And I have to say that the man who expressed this most clearly for me was when I read Julius Nyerere's articles, and he spoke about the fact that he was ready to prevent Tanzania independence, to hold it back if other countries around were ready to join with Tanzania, so that they wouldn't begin as different countries, but they would start life as a federation of East Africa. And he said, because now that it's happened, we've gone for our independence, they've gone for theirs, they have so many flags and national anthems and 21-gun salutes, you never can get them together again. These politicians are so rooted in their own individual power. And I found out that politicians there, whom I was very close to, I could see close up, they ate at my table sometimes, were just exactly like the others, only these were bigger thieves, much bigger thieves. These people thought small, but these here, they go for billions. How corrupt they are, you saw their egos, you saw it all. I learned that all in the West Indies, and it has stood me in very good stead.
Okay, yes.
During the civil rights activist years in the USA, there was obviously a lot of grassroots movements that were dedicated to self-defense and protecting women from being raped and things like that. How do you feel about, I'm just sort of interested in your opinion on how you feel about the fact that those groups, particularly like led by Robert F. Williams and things like that, have been neglected for a popular narrative where it's all about anti-violence and Martin Luther King and things like that, that they were the truly heroic ones, whereas these people that were actually standing up and fighting for their women and fighting for each other are now sort of considered the dangerous radicals. I was just sort of wondering what your sort of views on that are.
Well, Robert F. Williams was a great man. People don't know about him, but he stood against the Klan, and the Klan used to come into Monroe, North Carolina, and he organized black people to have guns, and when the Klan came in, the people started shooting, and the Klan never came back. So that was nice. And then the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People wanted to put him on the carpet and throw him out because he was violent. But I think we misunderstand King. King came in, and he didn't know from nothing. The movement had just begun. Rosa Parks, who was part of the anti-rape movement, I think you might know some of that now, part of the black women's anti-rape movement, that's where she got her experience not to go on the bus. And so he was faced with a movement which he was not trained to lead. And then he had a few years, he did some good things. He did I Have a Dream speech. I can't bear that speech, it's terrible. It's a terrible speech, I have a dream. No, he didn't have any dream at all. He had a nightmare, and he didn't want to deal with it because he was just next door to the White House. And then there was a riot, a rebellion in Los Angeles. And he went out in the streets in Los Angeles, in Watts, which I know because I used to live there, in Watts, and tell them to go home. And they told him, go to hell. And Bayard Rustin, who was a gay man in the black movement, but had to be in the closet at that time in the 60s, he said publicly the crowd was right and we were wrong. He was out, which was a big step forward. And King really fell in popularity. And then a lot of things happened, which is not necessary to go into, but he understood more and he had experience. And then he did two things. In 1967, in fact on the 4th of April, he made a speech which was extraordinary and said he was going to come out against the war. He had not come out against the Vietnam War, and he made a speech which was absolutely, because the man was a great, great speaker, a great orator. And he said, we ain't going to study war no more. And then he went down to Atlanta to support the garbage workers, what we call sanitation workers, what we call dustmen. And he said, what we need is a national black strike. All the black workers come up, they would finish with racism in a day. In a day! And they killed him almost immediately. That's what happened to Martin Luther King. To the day, on the 4th of April, 1 year after he made the anti-war speech, he was dead. Because what he was calling for, not violent, but definitely big and revolutionary. And the American establishment were not going to have that. And then they killed Bobby Kennedy as well to make sure that that whole educated elite, which the movement had educated and trained, they killed Malcolm, who was our speaker. He spoke for us. He said in public what black people always said in their kitchens. He said it. He told the real story. They killed him when he was about to break out of his black separatism. Then they killed King, and then they killed Robert Kennedy. And then they put people in prison. That's how they dealt with it. That's how they dealt with the movement. But you mustn't think that King was a traitor. You mustn't think that. I used to think that, and I'm sorry. I kind of publicly beg pardon because I didn't know this other thing which was hidden. And the thing about King, the thing about those three, I mean, there are many, but the thing, and there was four. They killed Fred Hampton in Chicago. And those four people were extraordinary, not merely because they were dedicated to the movement, and they were true revolutionaries. I don't mean they had a party. I don't mean any of that nonsense that the left goes on with. They really wanted to organize massively against the state across the divisions among us. The thing about them is that each of them could have had multiracial support. King, a lot of white people liked him. And if he had had a black strike, the white people would have come on it. They weren't going to be left behind working while all black people taking a day off. Never. They were going to join. And they were going to be faced with a massive strike in the United States. They had to kill him from their point of view. And we didn't know how to protect him from our point of view. And this was true with the other three as well. Fred Hampton was bringing Latino men and Afro men together. Stop fighting between the Puerto Ricans and the people of African descent. Let us get it together. The story is extraordinary and hidden. He was a great man, and he was 21 or 22 when he was killed. He had already the experience and the leadership and the political perspective that we needed. So they killed him. So we have to look again at and find out about all these things. But behind, while this, I have to say this, while this was going on and the movement, I'm no expert on the movement, and I was here, or I was in the West Indies, and I missed a lot of, what really went on in the States. There were these welfare mothers, and they were a fantastic part of the anti-racist movement. For Money for Women, the Wages for Housework campaign learned from them. Money for Women, wages for unwaged work. They didn't use that language, they just did it and they said it. And they were anti-war, and they fought for real education, really anti-racist education. They did fantastic work. And we have the honor to have worked with a couple of them, a couple of those leaders, and they were extraordinary women, and I shall never forget them. They're all dead now. But, the movement, the same point that I raised with this, you have to be very precise about what it is people did, how they did it, who they did it with, and what they accomplished, and what we can learn from them, and what we can build on, and what they left behind. I mean, these are questions, and each of them we have to go into and look at closely. I'm not saying that this is the end. There was Chico Mendes. There were people in a number of countries who were offering international leadership, not only in the United States, but the movement in the United States was absolutely crucial, because that was the belly of the monster, and we really everywhere need the movement in the U.S. to make a way for us, because they're so pervasive. With Israel as their, what do they call it? Pardon me. When the gunslinger in the cowboy movies, the hired guns, that's Israel. They are definitely the hired guns. And I'm a member of the International Jewish Anti-Zionist Network, and we've just putting out a pamphlet, having some trouble with the printer, and it will be out, I hope, by Monday, about Israel's major industry, which is repression. Major industry. And the United States at this moment in time can't do without them. That's the symbiotic relationship which President Obama could not deal with. I'm giving very long answers, and maybe people have better things to say. I'm sorry, but the questions,
very nice answers.
You want to speak? Do you want to please address the audience so they can hear you?
My English is so bad,
I understand it.
but I understand you. Okay, I'm living in Germany. I am from Tunisia, and I find splendid.
So shall I repeat? You live in Germany. You're from Tunisia. Is that what you said? Right.
Yes, I am living in Germany since 34 or 38 years.
38 years
because
in
of
Germany.
that, I forgot my English. Yes.
Yeah.
And then
But
forgot how
I
English.
am coming from Tunisia. I remark that movements, such kind of movements, have no big chance in this world.
Movements have no big chance in this world.
Perhaps the other revolution, what happens now in Tunisia, yes, it's a miracle, yes.
What's happening in Tunisia now is it's like a miracle.
A miracle, yeah. But Gandhi was killed too. Gandhi. And,
they killed Gandhi.
Yes. My question is: is there any chance for people who like really the mankind, humanity?
Who love
Is
mankind.
there any chance for people who love mankind, humankind?
Is there any chance?
That's
Is there
what
any
I
chance?
think that is everybody's question.
Yes.
I think there is.
Yes.
And I think, not only I think there is, I think that it had better move. We need that movement now, and what happened is a miracle, and what is happening in Egypt continues. And what they're not telling you, even on Channel 4 News, that the struggle in Egypt is over workers' rights. You know, that this is a working class struggle, but you know the left is not, they're so, I don't like to say backward, but they are. They cannot tell people in this country, listen, what you are living through is what they are fighting for in Egypt. You have to know that this struggle is going on. It is your struggle because they want to have the trade unions respected. What the issue in Egypt, one major issue in Egypt, is that the working class have formed independent trade unions that bypass the state institutions that unions have become everywhere in the world. You know, that includes England. And they don't want that. Morsi doesn't want it. The ex-Mubarak people don't want it. Nobody wants the working class to be autonomous for itself in struggle with its own organizations. But we do. We do. And we have to organize internationally so that we can support each other in these crucial moments when our lives and all that we have won is on the line. Greenland is melting, and the oil companies want to use it as a business opportunity. And they are suicidally greedy. Nobody is saying that, because they're not starting with the human race. They are suicidally greedy. They don't care even if they die, but they'll die with billions in their hand. You know, they think they're invincible, but they're not. And that's a strength for us, so long as we know that we are not, and that we have to be together. And that moment is coming, you know, that moment of crossover between different races and different sectors, you know, and different countries, working class people, grassroots people, waged and unwaged, and different. That moment is coming. But you know, there are two problems. One of them is that people are afraid to tackle their own organizations or leave them. You know, either they change, or you go and form another one and say, to hell with you. That's what the Egyptians did. That's what they want, that's what they're fighting to defend right now in the streets in Tahrir Square, etc. And the other thing is that it's really the same thing. We don't think we can win, and we have to begin to believe in the perspective of winning. That's why the book has that name. You know, Sex, Race, and Class, the perspective of winning is the perspective of destroying the divisions among us and not being caught in this sector or that sector, but seeing your connection with every sector. I'm not talking about making links. Making links assumes that we're really not together, but we should try to join together. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that we are intrinsically together, but our connections, our deep connections, are hidden or buried, and we have to bring those connections out in ways that are useful for our liberation. That's a big problem. But you know, I did see the movement that elected Obama the first time. And it happened very quickly. And the Indian movement, how long did it take? I mean, it didn't happen, and years passed, and all of a sudden, within weeks, people were on the street, and within weeks they were clarifying how they stood in relation to other people in the same movement, which is so crucial. You know, you have to know where you stand in the movement and what are the political tendencies and how they can be incorporated or refused. And you have to learn to make those decisions, and you have to learn how to do it and share how to do it with other people. So you say, listen, this is what you did last time. It doesn't work. Don't do it again. For God's sake, you're better than that. You know, we go through that at the center. You know, everybody here is going to be bored with what I'm saying. But, you know, that's what you have to do in order to win. And you have to do the work. And you have to do it as a priority. In spite of the fact that you have a paper to do, you have to do this other work. Your paper will be delayed, but it will be better. I met a lot of people in the US who they liked very much what I said, and they said, oh, this is going to help me with my paper. And I said to myself, oh dear. That's not why I came from the UK to speak in England, is to help her with her paper. You know, I'm trying to build a movement. That's what I want her to be doing. She can do her paper. I'm not against her doing her paper. But there have to be priorities. And the movement is the priority. And I remember this woman who interviewed me, towards the end of the interview, she said, you use the word movement all the time. What is it? And I felt very sad, actually. I felt very sad because I've never had to define it before. I've just assumed it and assumed that people know that it's when people get together and they're excited to be together and because there's something they need to do and they're ready to do it and to work out how to do it and in a collective way and to bring others along, etc. That's a movement. You know, that's what happened in Tunisia, and that's what happened in Egypt, with a much bigger working class population and with a great feeling for Palestine. In Egypt in particular, because the Rafah crossing, which is the only exit for Gaza, goes into Egypt, and so the fight was about whether the Rafah crossing would open or would stay open or would be closed and all the rest. But there were thousands on the street chanting Free Palestine in Egypt, in Tahrir Square. They didn't need any coaxing about that, and they didn't need any leadership at all. They knew exactly what was needed.